very much for coming. Thank you very much to the Board of Trade for offering us this opportunity to it's Business Continuity Awareness Week globally. And the Board of Trade was kind enough to give us an opportunity to make this presentation. My name is Tor Fosnes. I've been involved in management issues and consulting and stuff for the last 15 years. I come from a background of offshore work, and I'm currently involved in upgrading or bringing up to newer standards, ISO standards for a welding company, which is basically a small business. I guess business continuity management is a system of a business management system that grew out of the work of Deming and those people back in the late 40s and early 50s. It's managed to roll along fairly slowly for most of the 60s and 70s. By the early 80s, say it's 35 years ago now, it was like a ship that had the keel made and the hull was built and they had one deck on and they were ready now to let it slip into the water. And it went along fairly well, but slowly for a number of years. And the turning point for business continuity management, business continuity planning was 9/11. Right after 9/11, within a year of 9/11, they discovered that of the thousands of companies that were involved in the World Trade Center collapse, all the buildings, the five or six buildings, of the thousands of companies who were there, those that did not have a business continuity management plan in place at the time of the catastrophe failed within a year of the incident. They had no resiliency, they had no way to recover and get back. So, you're talking maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple of thousand companies. So that was an eye-opener for all of the industry, especially in America, and especially in New York, and especially in the insurance business. So over the years now, it's working out that the insurance industry doesn't require business continuity management from small companies, but we have a good authority that if you have a business continuity management plan in place, that you can get discounts or considerations for the cost of building your big BCM plan. The BCI, the Business Continuity Institute of London, Pat and I are both certified members of that. I think we're the only two east of Montreal, in fact. So right here in St. John's, you have a tremendous resource that a lot of people don't have. There are, I think, about 15,000 certified business continuity specialists or planners around the world. It's really big in England, it's really big in Europe, it's really big in Australia, and most of Asia. In North America, not so much. More so in the United States after 9/11. In Canada, it's spotty. In Ontario, the provincial government of Ontario has encouraged almost all businesses to at least address the BCM process, but again, it's not mandatory. I think in Canada there are maybe 50 to 60 people with a certification. The certification process is standard one for any kind of business management system. You do the studies in the course. So back in about 2012, I was involved in ISO development for the company I work with, and I just came across the idea that business continuity management was out there, and that nobody was really paying much attention to it. So I've been working with Pat, my partner Pat, for a number of years in other aspects of work, and we sat down and we said, well, let's explore this, and we went and did the course in Toronto and took the exam, and we're now certified business continuity planners. There is an international standard, ISO 22301, which is a business continuity standard. It's been around since 2012, and it's built on the Business Continuity Institute, good practice guidelines and codes and so on. And Pat will deal with that a little later. This is our website here, Resilient BCM. Keeping the ball in play is our motto. You're welcome to go to resilientbcm.com. You're welcome to go to that site and have a look through the materials that are there at any time. The ISO standard was built on the VCI practice, but it doesn't replace it necessarily. But the way we look at it is that if you have a business continuity management plan and you wish to become ISO certified, then it's a very easy step. If you want to go for the ISO business continuity management standard and register for it, the work you're doing is what VCI thing says you should do in order to become certified. I am personally also involved in ISO auditing, so I have my black belt management system auditing. It's the ISO 19011, and it allows me to audit any kind of business management system, whether it's through a certification standard or not. I'm hoping to be able to get some real work in that level. The ISO standard now is, the ISO standards have become standardized. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but they have what's called a higher level structure. So all this clauses of one standard, like 9001 2015 or 14001 2015, or in this case 301 2012, are built to the same structure, and they have basically, I'll just quickly run through them. There's the context of the organization, who you are, what's your place in the world, who influences you, who you interact with, leadership, which is where you get management commitment, which is this lady was saying earlier, is that they know they have to go this next level up, but they'd like someone to do it for them. But in fact, you have to do it yourself, and this is where leadership comes in. Leadership, top management, they call it, has to be totally committed. Planning, support, operations, performance evaluation, which is where your audits come in and your management reviews come in at the end of the year, and then finally improvement or continuous improvement. These are all part of the good practice guidelines as well, so nothing's really changed. Okay? Business continuity encompasses planning and preparation. I'm reading this, sorry. Planning and preparation to ensure that an organization can continue to operate in case of serious incidents or disasters and is able to recover to an operational state within a reasonably short period. So the basic elements are resilience, recovery, and contingency, or ways to prepare yourself for future events. Now, the final note I want to say is that business continuity is a holistic approach to management. Okay? Emergency planning, IT recovery, disaster and recovery, these things are all elements of business continuity. But business continuity looks at the business functions, your prime business functions. So, for instance, if you're a company that sells things, then your sales function is probably one of the most important functions in your organization. Okay? So anything that can affect your sales operation and can be considered disruption is what business continuity management will look at. Not necessarily is what happens if that computer breaks down or if that building burns down, but if any disruption happens, an interruption happens, that can affect our future, and how do we deal with that? So you're at this higher level of knowledge and understanding of your business functions. I guess we can wait till afterwards if you have any questions. So I'm going to leave it at that from my point for the moment, and I'm going to turn it over to Pat Curran, who's we're partners in Resilient BCM, and we've been friends for a number of years. We've worked closely together over 50 years. So he comes at business continuity management from a slightly different angle than I do. Say I'm involved in standardization and management systems that can be audited and so on, whereas Pat comes at it from the point of view of well, I'll let him tell you what it is. But anyway, so but our two approaches, or our two backgrounds, are very complementary in terms of business continuity management and planning systems. So, okay, Pat, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Joe. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How are you? One, actually, not set up there. I wouldn't mind you know, when you think about business continuity, what do you think of when you think about business continuity? What's the first thing that sort of comes to mind? A little discussion a little earlier. What do you think it encompasses or captures?
Capacity to keep going.
Yeah? Anything else?
Does anybody here actually have a business continuity management plan?
We have a risk management.
Risk management, yes, in fact, risk management is, I mean, in your business continuity management system that you develop, as you develop it, it's based on risk-based thinking, just as all the ISO standards are these days, okay? So you don't do it unless you've done your risk and hazard analysis and determine where it may be.
What our association did a couple of years ago, we set up a risk management board. We identified a whole bunch of issues and we took our top 20 and then prioritized, you know,
Yes.
that way kind of thing. And so we sort of focused, you know, top 10, if you want to call it, I guess, the things that could have, you know, affect us or cause disruption, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Oh, that's it, yeah, you're on your way. We don't actually build, like I said this lady earlier, I said, I'm not going to come in and make you a plan, because if top management has to be involved, and it has to have buy-in from top management and support, then all I can do is help you develop that system that suits you particularly. And the idea about business continuity management is that it has absolutely no limits in size, either small or big, and it uses again, like I say, these holistic principles and methods of thinking. So no matter how big or small you are, you can avail yourself of this. Does anyone here have emergency management plans in place?
So we have an emergency management plan, and we have what we call a crisis management plan.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
we have risk management committees,
Yeah.
when we look at everything for a risk register and a risk matrix.
Yeah.
Business continuity would be the next piece of that. So we've been building it. We've been building it, so I work at Stella Circle, we've been building it for 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Keith?
But
Yeah.
getting there.
This other-
I have a, business continuity plan as they were considered 10, 15 years ago.
Yes.
So things have changed, because now it's not just about making sure that everybody can work from some site or whatever, it goes much deeper.
Well, one of the things that we're up against is an attitude, a Newfoundland businessman's attitude. Once said to a man, we're talking about business continuity, I said, do you have a business continuity plan? He said, yes, he said, I plan to stay in business as long as I can. So it's a good answer, but it's like so far off the mark for me, I had to bring him up on it, you know. Anyway, Pat, go ahead, I'm sorry. Pat's going to lead us through some of the steps and principles of this business continuity management.
Yeah, a brief presentation which I sort of ran around. I'm going to take you down through the, let's say, the good practice guidelines and some of the steps in the business continuity management development process. And in that discussion, I'll touch on how we would approach the work with the client and give you a sense of what some of the steps there would be. Talk a little bit about what we perceive and what the literature suggests is the benefits of business continuity. We'll give you a sense of what some of the trends, Tor touched on it to a certain extent, but I'll expand on it just a little bit, what some of the issues and trends that are impacting the adoption of business continuity. And then toward the end, hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion. I'm sort of going to ask you some sort of key questions really that sort of jar you, maybe that'll allow us to sort of transition into a discussion toward the end. I think we're good till 10 o'clock. If we finish up a little early, well, that's fine. Right? As Tor said, you and I have been collaborating for many years in the consulting world. For many years I was executive director of the Regional Economic Development Board. And also served for a time as mayor of the local municipality. So that put us in contact together. Tor was sort of the go-to consultant for some work we did on governance and operating systems within our organization. He contributed to the establishment of our quality management system within that organization. I think at the end we didn't go to the ISO designation, but I think at the time we were the only regional economic development board that at least had a quality management system in place. When I finished with the development board, some of the first work that I did was in relation to community-based emergency management planning. There was a legislative requirement by May of 2012, every municipality in the province had to have an up-to-date emergency management plan, according to legislation. And having worked with a number of municipalities, I had some sense of the level of capacity of those small municipalities to actually, facilitate and lead that planning process. And in many cases, there wasn't a whole lot of capacity there. So I began to do some work with some small municipalities in my area to facilitate the emergency management process there. Did some work with the town of Cape Oil and the town of Fairland. And later facilitated a regional emergency management plan in the Isthmus of Avalon area. And while I was doing that work on emergency management, I found it very much directed, it's already been suggested, directed toward external threats to the organization. But the emergency management planning process really didn't address internal threats. It didn't address the issue of what happens if you have labor stoppage, if your outside workers don't show up, or your water main goes down, or whatever the case may be. The operational issues, really. So I was sort of...
The example I like to use always is that what happens if the town clerk kicks them loose on the way to work?
Perfect.
Okay? Your whole municipal organization is going to suffer unless you've got a plan in place to deal with those kinds of contingencies.
So when I sort of looked at it, I was grasping for what the gap was, and that was around the time that Thor and I began to really think about the concept of business continuity. So we sort of looked at we knew what we were talking about, but we hadn't really put a name on it until we sort of did the literature. And then we began to scan around and see and looked at the various professional practices that sort of related to business continuity planning. There's some professionalization around disaster recovery and so on, risk that's been mentioned. So that's sort of how we approached it, and that in turn transitioned into the training and development of our business plan and so on. So we've been sort of picking away at this for the last 4 or 5 years. Some of the clients that we've worked with, in addition to the emergency management work, would be the disaster recovery plan with my hydro place facility. I have completed some municipal-based business continuity plans. Active threat plans, that sort of work, we've done some of that with Governors Mill College. Completed a business continuity plan for the Southern Shore Arena Association. And I was on the board of directors of that association at the time, and we had a long-standing manager, 25, 26 years service, who had all the corporate knowledge in his head. And there was some pressure around the board to get that documented. And it was a good thing we did. So I took him through that exercise for about a year, and I think 6 months after we completed the plan, the guy was diagnosed with a It was just one of those sorts of situations where very rapid decline in his condition and so on. So fortunately enough, we were able to sort of get that all documented in terms of operating procedures and so on. So it's been an interesting sort of work. I also do more general consultancy. I won't say this is a sideline, but it's been interesting. Last year around this time, Thor and I were in Uganda making a presentation to an emergency management conference. And it was around the time, you'll recall, of Fort McMurray and all of that sort of stuff. That was more of an emergency management situation, but I think the issue that confronted all those business owners when we went back into Fort McMurray, it became a very quickly business continuity issue. I think back to the Calgary floods back in 2013, I remember, or 2014, I remember someone giving me a call and said, "You should be Calgary now, great time to do business." I said, "No, it's too late to be in Calgary now doing business. I should have been in Calgary 3 months ago doing business continuity plans." The opportunity is sort of lost. But anyway, that's sort of my story. So what I'd like to do, as I said, is sort of take you down through some of the process. Thor talked about the engagement of top management. And developing that program and policy that's in line with the organization's values. Like any quality management system, it really has to link back to what the vision for the company is and what the corporate governance model is and what that company values in terms of how it's approached. So your business continuity plan ultimately becomes grounded in your organizational vision, mission, principles, and so on. Thor as well talked about management buy-in. Management buy-in and ownership is absolutely critical. Those are the folks that can affect policy changes at the senior level of the organization. But as you work down through the organization, if there's not a sense in middle management or at the process level that the top management is not engaged, and generally they're not going to be engaged. So it has to be owned. The other consideration with respect to that sort of stuff is this requires a commitment of resources, and more often than not, top management are the only people who are in a position to allocate those resources, whether it's financial or staff or whatever.
You know,
Whatever the case may be.
just a quick note on resources is that you have already committed a lot of resources, most companies have committed a lot of resources to various management systems within their things. So if you have systems already in place, then adding a BCM into that is fairly easy and fairly low cost.
Now, from the perspective of Resilient, we would work with a client to develop that management policy around business continuity plan, assisting them in drafting the guidelines around the approach and setting up that policy and so on. Also, giving them some sense of what the resource allocations and budgets and so on might be. And the other step in the process really is once you adopt a business continuity management system, it really has to be what we call embedded in the entire organization. To a great extent, it's a communications function. And it begins really from the start. The objective here is to engage your business process owners or your middle management or whatever in the process. Get them engaged because they're really the people who have a decent sense of what the active threats may be in relation to the processes, what the impact of losing that process might ultimately be, and so on. So again, we can support that through development of training, communications programs, and so on. Of course, the rubber always hits the road on this when you get into the analysis side. There is a function within business continuity planning called business impact assessment. Some people have talked about risk registers and so on. But this is the detailed stuff. Really, it involves identifying the processes that constitute your business. If you're a production company, it could be that production line. If you're a service company, it could very well be something else. But it essentially allows you to define the key elements of your business that add value to your organization. And then, to the extent that you can, attempt to identify what the comparative value of that business process is to your bottom line. That in turn allows you to prioritize things that you need to bring online after a disruption more quickly. Follow where I'm going. If you have if you have two production lines, one of which is responsible for 70% of your output and 80% of your revenue, then it's realistic to think that you're going to want to get that production line up first before the other production line. If you think I'm oversimplifying, but if you think about it in that context, then that's perhaps the easiest way to think about it. We'll do a threat identification, generally at the level of the business owner, or whoever owns that business process within your organization. So if you've got a middle manager who's responsible for a certain aspect, that's the person who generally has a sense of what that process is. It could be a piece of equipment. It could be a key staff person. You could be defining this in relation to production inputs. It could be a supplier issue and a failure to deliver raw materials on time, which should turn impact your. So we sort of take a look at that. We identify the processes. We do a risk assessment in relation to those threats that we've identified, and then we sort of allow you to report that through all of that. That really then allows you to get into the detailed analysis of your business and set some recovery. When you get into the business planning and design stage, that's when you begin to consider specific strategies and tactics and so on. It allows you to set sort of technical terms that Tor and I generally don't like to use, but it allows you to define what they call a maximum tolerable period of disruption. how long can we have that piece of equipment down? And then in turn, that allows you to set some realistic times around recovery, by setting a recovery time objective and so on. I really don't want to go too far down into the professional weeds and that sort of stuff, but these are sort of terms and concepts that are used within the practice. And when you get into the design and strategy stage, you're also talking about the allocation of resources. I mean, the reality of it is, if you think about business continuity and think about it in the context of your capacity to recover quickly, let's assume you're a call center. Your call center cannot be down. Is it feasible for you to have a duplicate call center? Well, okay, but the ideal way to do it would be to switch a switch and the other call center's up. But it's not going to be cost effective. So then you have to place some attempt to assign some value to whether or not we need that call center up and what it costs. It allows you to sort of make some decisions in terms of what your priorities are. And as Tor said, it's scalable. You can take a look at 2 or 3 primary business processes and focus on those first, those ones that are most important, leave the rest. Or you can take all aspects of it and sort of roll through it at the same time.
Excuse me, Pat, just a quick note here. We like to talk about organization, okay? Not business. You are a business, I understand. Any organization, an NGO or a non-for-profit, any organization has business functions. Okay, so if we look at it from, again, a holistic point of view, where we say, let's look at the business functions in this organization and come up with ways to deal with it, rather than saying it's a business. You know, we're trying to stay away from like the corporate world, although it needs that. But we look at the term organization versus a business. It's important for us in terms of how we approach the whole process.
Yeah, we just make the distinction that a more appropriate term would be organization. Most of the work we've done has been with, to a certain extent, in the NGO or the public sector, at least in terms of the work we've done with municipal governments. Once you've got the design down, and again, to look at the entire process, it requires the engagement of the endorsement and engagement of senior management. But in my experience, that strategy selection and identifying what the actual plans will be for each process is best led by the process owner. A good example would be some work I did with the town of Holyrood. Much of the plan focused on their public works capacity. And the ideal person to do it would have been their manager of public works. And we were very engaged with the towns outside the foreman and so on, and working through that plan. One of the big issues they had there was they didn't have a great inventory of what they actually had in the ground. So just to give you an example of how that sort of plays out, how many valves do you maintain in inventory, for example, on hand, as opposed to having to wait 24 hours to get a supplier? And every single one of those decisions.
Is that like traffic lights?
Sorry?
Is that the same as
Same
traffic
traffic
lights?
Prime example. Now, from the city's perspective, would it make sense to carry 100 streetlights in inventory? Probably not. They had 35, I think, as it turned out, right? I think we should be probably speaking about parking meters now. How many of those they've got? But ultimately, whatever you do, there's a cost associated with it. The difference between maintaining 35 streetlights in inventory versus 100 on hand, there's a cost associated with that. In some instances, you can push your requirements around continuity down to your suppliers to a certain extent. But again, you may have to pay. By that I mean, you may work with the supplier of that stoplight. And essentially says, yes, we will have stoplights to you within 24 hours. But that's a level of service agreement that you're going to pay for. And so it really goes down to what can you, how important is the process or the service that you're trying to provide, and what are you prepared to pay to sustain it. It's an interesting sort of process. look at.
And I'm just going to interject here again because we like to say that business continuity management isn't a cost, it's an investment. Okay? Because if you're protecting yourself in the future and you're going to be resilient and you're going to recover, then what money you spend on business continuity planning, obviously it's an investment, not a cost. Okay? And it's hard for a lot of people who have, especially small company owners and small organization owners, to understand that the reality is that if you spend money today on a business continuity plan, it's going to give you returns. Those are hard to see in the moving forward part of the process. But after it happens, you say, wow, I'm so glad I spent that money.
Talk to finance people.
No.
Everything she puts in is an investment.
That's right. Exactly.
Depends on how you position
Training
it,
is
right?
an investment. You
Uh,
still got to come factor it into your cash flow.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just moving ahead, once you get the plans in place, to a certain extent, there's going to be costs associated with it. We'll be back to that point, maintain 35 streetlights in inventory versus 100, so there's, so as you transition into the implementation stage, you're allocating resources. Generally, you're assigning some staff resources to assume lead responsibility. Depending on the size of the organization, you may retain a business continuity manager, but I think that would be a stretch for most companies. And so on, just to maintain the plan and so on, and facilitate the annual evaluations. The validation stage really goes into periodic plan reviews, the usual stuff that you would expect if you're engaged in an ISO system. It could be exercises, it could be additional training, or even right down to formal auditing. So throughout every stage of the process that I've outlined here, we've got capacity to support your organization's requirements in that regard. So,
Could you also make plans that, in the event of something that's made a change, that you're not going to be immediately covered at 100%, but you could be operating at 70% for a period of time? In the case of the traffic lights, for instance, a 2-lane road could be working with one traffic light for a period of time.
That's part of your recovery, and you set those objectives. You say, I want to recover immediately to 70%, and then in a period of time I want to get back to 80 or 90 or whatever your limit is. Also, it's a matter of what's sure I want to say. But yes, that's a good point. That your plan doesn't necessarily say you have to be back full force right away, but you can stage yourself back to full recovery.
So my understanding with this then is it's a lot about actually coming up with a plan that is acceptable ahead of time as opposed to having to figure it out at the time and then decide if that is acceptable.
Well, in fact, yes. I mean, you can't come up with a business continuity management plan or system when the event has happened. You can, but you're not dealing with that event now. You're trying to deal with the future. Right? So it's important to have it in place. A plan is always that you have it in place, and you can use it when it's needed.
Actually, half of our association, 10 or 12 years ago, we were caught, we were caught in the building, and it was a fire. There was a lot of smoke and water damage, so we were ejected basically from the building for, I think it was a period of 3 months, but we had on the fly, we had to set up basically essentially another office over the weekend, to serve our customers, our fair clients and things like that. Like, we're not a sales, but we still have, a function. And so it was really an interesting exercise for us on, what could happen and how we respond to something and what we need to think about going forward, And that's where our emergency response plan came to be after that, but a little slightly different thing, but it was an interesting exercise in, scrabbling on the fly as opposed
catching
to
up is
working from a plan, you know what I mean? And I looking back on it, of course, I know if we had a plan like that, the whole process probably would have got a lot simpler, right? But we had to do what we had to do, like most people probably do on the fly,
Nowadays, being on the fly is really involved with social media business. like, rather than having a call, where we were talking about a call list, you establish a call list, so that some person calls 5 people, and that person goes 5, Now we say, listen, everyone has Facebook, most people have Facebook in your staff. So it's a simple matter of when something happens, you say, everybody knows instantly, and if you have a plan, then everybody knows when they get that message, when they get that Facebook message or email, they know what their role is. Oh, I have to go and find a new office space. Oh, I have to go and arrange for transportation. These kinds of things that's what your plan covers, right?
So is a communication plan part of what you do?
Yes. In all business management systems nowadays, you have things like I said, the context of the organization, organizational knowledge, which is one of the things Pat talked about. You're supposed to be able to have a list somewhere of what everyone in the organization knows and does and how they operate. So yes, this is all part of and communications is the most important part, because you're a top manager, you bought into this system. Now you need to embed it in your organization. So you're not going to go out and say to staff, okay, you're all now part of this now and come outside. There has to be a process where you communicate the values and benefits of the process and system to them. And if they can see the values and benefits, then they will own it and work with it.
I've had the experience in a business continuity situation, but a bit different. I worked in the Middle East, and so we had evacuation plan, and it was a civil war, so we had a communication plan, but we involved like WhatsApp groups, and you'd hear there was a bomb in one part of town, and so we'd send off to we built a web of, you take care of this part of town, and so I'd connect, or you take care of this group of employees, so we'd connect to that person, and they'd connect down to the 6 or 8 people so that you're not doing all the work. We found that in that particular environment, the WhatsApp groups were the best way for us to do that, which would never have been part of my formal communication plan had I sat down to do a communication plan. But I have a question about finances on this. So then, do you recommend that this plan and its anticipated costing be part of the budget or an appendix of the budget that's always held on reserve to the side? And if so, what percentage of the total budget do you recommend for organizations?
Well, that's interesting, yes. I mean, in a business, if you develop a business continuity management system for your organization, then those would be specific items that you would address there, okay? So I can't tell you, we can tell you that for us to come in and work with you over a certain period of time to get a BCP in place, then we'll charge you this much money, okay? But your cost, the internal cost, like you got to pay a guy, your line manager has to sit with us for a certain number of hours.
Oh, I don't mean that on the front end. I mean, when you're determining your metrics, so how many 2-lane streets do you have in your town, how many 3-lane, 4-lane, et cetera. So then you determine, you use your metrics and anticipate how many street lights if you're going to do 70% capacity, because this is all predictable with the right metrics, right?
Yes.
So then I would need to keep on reserve so many dollars for those lights to get my 70% anticipated. So is there a general ratio that you recommend as a hold aside for businesses?
No, it's a general ratio that you would determine, not me. We can't tell you anything about it. As a matter of fact, one of our codes of or one of our ethical practices or codes of practice here is that we don't want to deal with financial issues. Okay, your finances are of no interest to us, and there's no reason for us to understand or have knowledge of them. But you have to determine where your limits are. How much money do you want to spend on business continuity management this year?
Well, then ultimately we go back to what processes
Yes.
you value the most. To my point about how much you prepare to, that's where the cost comes in. As you said, take that example. Do we want 70 streetlights on hand in our capital inventory? I guess Tor's point is whether or not you want 70 or 50, that'll ultimately be
It's your determination.
it'll be ultimately a management decision. But it'll be based on, to an extent, an analysis of the value and the importance. Some of it's and some of it isn't. In the case of a business enterprise, a business can very easily say, if that production line goes down, this is what it's going to cost. So then you begin to take a look at, what's the cost of getting that production line back off.
Contingencies.
Yeah, is it paramount? Do you have a second system there that that isn't operating?
Well, part of it, Ben had reserve, but also is having a business interruption insurance, as a component of that kind of thing. It might not mean you'll need to have that much in reserve if you've got insurance, These are different factors depending on the size of the organization, what you do, what your sales are, and everything else. There's a lot of.
And what the risk is to your customers, like in our case, we're manufacturing. We promise a delivery date. And Igor comes through and would say, brings the hardware, and we can't deliver on time. You have to go back and look at your contract because we get penalties, every day you don't deliver on time, there's a cost. So they want to see our continuity plan. And I feel better after being in here. Because I think we're on, we've got some of it, bits and pieces, like we've been disrupted so many times. We're on the ordinance, we're, rural, 4.5 hours from the airport. We have disruptions with the ferry, weather causes, transportation disruptions. Most of our equipment's manufactured in the U.S. or Sweden, so a piece of equipment goes down, you have a disruption. So we've had, over the last few years, had to put plans in place that says, we're going to carry an extra motor for that piece of equipment, because that went down 3 times last year.
Yeah,
Right?
that's right.
And, we've even gone into like succession planning, and,
Yeah.
we got our emergency response planning, what happens if there's a fire in the plant.
Succession planning is if someone dies, but we like to look at it more as if there's a loss of personnel for any reason.
Well, that's
Okay, so
what,
we're at
yeah,
that
that's what,
next
yeah,
level
that's
of
right,
it.
that's what we're looking at, if the president moves on, who's going to fill that role, right?
So just my very first business continuity plan was a box in the trunk of my car
Yes.
Yes.
with plans to the building, emergency contacts for staff and suppliers, CDs with backup CDs for our computers, and my home office was where we would all gather
Yeah.
to see what we had to do. That was it. Now, we all have remote access to offset
Sure.
server, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And now the big threat is if that goes down.
That's right. We had that
No,
too.
we talked to-
That's the
I think
threat,
the,
because
uh,
everything is now on server.
Yeah, I think the discussion about cost is, has to be based also on the fact that most of these things that if you were going to start to build a business continuity management system, most of the things are already inside your organization, all right? It's not something brand new you got to spend money on, oh my God, we got to hire someone to do this or that. It's all based on your existing systems and your existing functions. Right? So the actual cost to you can be considerably less if you already spend money on management systems and so on.
Yeah, you're already well down that road. But the question on communications and so on, we'll bring in a point, but let's say a business continuity plan will address communications, but it won't necessarily address it to what we as crisis communications or whatever the case may be. I think along that line, where we run up then to a certain extent the limits of professional certification and so on, or other people out there. I don't profess to be a communications expert, but I'd like to write a communications plan, if you follow where I'm going. And you find that depending on where you are at any stage of this sort of stuff, you're touching on other disciplines. The accountants get a bit wonky when you talk about audits and financial analysis and saying this process adds this much value to your organization. Best then to engage the auditors and accountants in that level of assessment and analysis. And as we said, it just links to 4 or 5 other professional disciplines out there doing emergency management planning initiatives. In some instances, you need to engage the city authorities and so on. Anyway, I'll transition into a little bit of a discussion on what the perceived benefits of business continuity planning are, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, but for any organization. And this would be from the literature. It does allow an organization to evaluate your weaknesses and your exposure, and offers management a better sense and insight into how to address what some of those issues may be. I think inherently in my experience, people already understand that. They've already got that notion that we're exposed or we're at risk here. But they haven't really gone through a formal process to define what the threat might be and to articulate it. In some instances, to be completely honest, people haven't even thought about it in the context of that process there is responsible for 70% of the revenue, and that process there is responsible for 30% of the revenue. They don't necessarily think about it in those terms. But when you sort of say, what happens if you lose that process there that's responsible for 70% of your output and revenue, something sort of happens. Think, oh, yeah.
Well, our association started it, and that's probably the reason why I'm here, right? Like associations, we're different from business. I mean, funding comes from often different sources, multiple sources, and whereas we're an association, we don't get much in the way of government grants, we're mostly self-generated funds from like our home lotteries, that kind of thing, right? And so that accounts for like 98% of our funding.
Which I think, by the way, I think your control is in, what, 24 hours left to?
No, that's the healthcare.
That's the other one?
We're a dream home,
Oh.
but the problem with us is we recognize the issue, we've been working on it for a couple of years to try to diversify our funding, right?
Yeah.
But we're a small province, there's a lot of groups after that pie, and there's more going out there all the time, so it's very, very challenging for us. So, we're trying to look at the long-term sustainability of the association, so this is part of what we're looking at, of ways that we try to recognize what our issues are and how we might approach them, et cetera, succession planning, all this part of it, but.
Again, if I was working with you, I would consider you as an organization, not an association, not a business, okay, you're an organization.
Yeah.
And therefore, we look at your business functions within your organization, you prioritize the ones that are most important to you, and then you help you develop strategies to work. Part of our consultancy is what we call full service, because not only am I going to help you build a plan, I'm going to help you manage it. I'm going to give you tips and ways to manage it. You can call me in to do reviews and exercises and analyses and all that stuff in the long term, okay? So we're not just going to come in and give you a way to create a binder with 12 pieces of paper in it, but we're going to make sure that that works through time. Again, that's where the commitment from top management has to come into place, is to say, okay, in 6 months from now, we're going to have you guys back and we're going to do a review of the plan as it is, right?
Moving ahead, it allows, one of the other benefits, it allows your stakeholders, your clients, your customers and so on to obtain a sense that you're actually concerned about your organization and how you relate to those others, particularly on the supply side, as some would say in this case. People who are buying your product from you want to have some confidence that you say you're going to have it delivered there on the 1st of April, that it's going to be actually there on the 1st of April, not on the 15th of April, regardless of whatever the nature of the business disruption might be.
All companies don't care.
Pardon?
Oh, that's right.
They don't care.
From a staff perspective, I mean, your capacity to be able to recover from a business disruption, the staff would be interested in knowing that because the business is down and not out of work indefinitely or whatever the case might be. There's reference made to business insurance, which is good to the extent that people have it, but that's sort of a stopgap measure until you get back. It protects your brand, your image, your reputation, and so on. I mean, there have been some spectacular business disruptions in the province in the last 5 or 6 years that have, I would argue, that damaged the brand of some fairly significant organization, Glen Hydro for one. And I don't think there'd be many people that would disagree with that. One of the other companies was.
I don't think we can disagree with the fact that they flubbed the recovery or flubbed the reaction part of it either. Right?
Well, there's that side of it, yeah, but it's probably best to leave that there.
Definitely leave that there, we are
Yeah,
on the
we'll,
That one causes their customers then to have to make their own investments. I mean, I am indirectly a customer of Newfoundland Hydro. If I don't have power,
Yeah.
my company doesn't run. My services aren't there. Now my clients don't have their backup services and all the rest of it. So now we've made an investment to make sure we always have power.
But even the best laid plans are going to go awry if the power's out.
Right,
You know what I mean?
that's what I mean,
Your
so,
alternate office is not going to help you one bit if power's out over there as well, right?
Backup
Right.
generator.
yeah,
And I would
Oh,
contrast,
yeah.
I contrast Hydro to a certain extent to Newfoundland Power. I think most people felt far more comfortable in terms of the level of engagement and how Newfoundland Power's brand came out of that exercise than Newfoundland Hydro. So I also, just to continue on Dark NL, you'll recall one of the other dynamics of Dark NL was the oil supply was threatened. And one of the major oil suppliers, you'll recall, came under a tremendous amount of flack. It's just simply because they didn't have enough capacity, as I understand it, in your customer service call center to deal with the number of people who were calling saying, when am I going to get my oil tank topped up? Just one of those, and it just impacted how they're, because they just weren't ready for it.
Also,
Again,
note on that though, the city of St. John's also was not prepared for that, so as a city who has an emergency plan.
they do it, and a business
And
continuity.
but their plan actually did not roll out that well either.
No.
There were some issues around like how they got set up and got moved.
Well, I can make a quick note here. I've been going to meetings and
Yeah.
meetings and so on, business continuity and emergency measures and different things like that. And people in St. John's, in the provincial government and in the university, the hospitals, yes, we have a business continuity plan, okay? But when you look at your business continuity plan, it is absolutely, totally devoted only to emergency planning.
Yeah.
Okay, or disaster recovery, DR, EMDR, okay?
Yeah.
So when you say to them, but that's not business continuity.
No.
There's, oh, yes, it is, right? But from our point of view, it's not, okay? So if you call it business continuity, but you concentrate on EM and DR, then obviously, you're missing some, again, as you said earlier this morning, that some higher level look at what it is you are and how you're
But
working.
they don't realize there's only one piece of it.
That's right.
Yeah,
They don't know what they don't know,
Yeah.
or what they should know, I guess.
And increasingly, to sort of add to that, a lot of people feel as though they have resumption capacity if their IT shop tells them that, no, we can bring it, don't sweat it. A lot of people conflate business continuity with, let's say, resilience and technology side.
Yeah, well, I mean, IT recovery is one business function in an organization. Talking about power up, we have servers at our office, but we also got to have these humongous great battery packs, so that when power goes down, we got like an hour and a half or 2 hours of running time still that we can get prepared to make sure that we don't lose anything. So, it's all part of that process.
So as has already been said, I guess the other benefit is that if you have an existing quality management system in place, this is a logical extension to it. It's an add-on. But it's not necessarily a difficult add-on because if you've already placed principles around quality management and other management systems, then this is not that significant a transition. One of the other benefits, depending on the space you're operating in, would be some companies are actually requiring business continuity plans of their suppliers. Tor had suggested a little earlier, it began to detect pre-qualification documents and so on, with the notion of do you have a box that said do you have a business continuity plan, and so on. And increasingly, in the last few years, and I think increasingly you will see it in the future, that to do business with some organizations, you are going to have a business continuity plan because they, similar to an ISO standard, they wish to extend their business continuity practices to their suppliers, and so on. I guess the last thing I would say with respect to the benefit, since 2008, a significant focus on best practices in terms of corporate governance and so on, and I guess like the audit function and so on. This is just another example of good corporate governance. So you're beginning to see it creep into those levels of an organization as well. Business continuity planning is just part of modern corporate governance.
Should be part.
Should be part. Some of the trends that are sort of impacting things these days, I'll move through this because I'm mindful of time here. I know we're going to wrap this off at 10 o'clock, and I'm up to 9:37 here now. But really there are 4 factors which are sort of driving a focus on, or at least have driven a focus on business continuity management plan adoption. In great part it ties to the industry, let's say the financial industry and the pharmaceutical business. There are obligations around business continuity planning. So there's a regulatory motive to, a regulatory imperative that you have to play. We haven't seen it yet, let's say from a provincial perspective. I had said earlier there was a regulatory requirement for municipalities to have an emergency management plan in place by May 2012. There isn't a parallel in terms of municipal government in relation to business continuity planning. Not Newfoundland and Labrador. I was in BC in April. I haven't seen anything from a regulatory perspective that compel a municipality to have a business continuity plan. Although at the provincial level, each provincial government has to have a continuity of operations plan, so that's certainly mandated around. You know, there's an opportunity. The insurance industry is beginning to speak a little bit more about business continuity planning. We talked about business disruption insurance, which is one level of supports that could be provided, but it's not inconceivable that at some point along the way, an insurance company will ask you to take that business continuity box as well. And that may make a difference in that premium that they're looking to charge you. Tor had talked about the genesis of business continuity coming out of Europe, and in particular the UK, and it really came out of the whole Northern Ireland situation, to be honest, and the Bannon campaign through much of the late 70s and early 80s. That's when the UK began to focus on it, just particularly less about and so on. So you're beginning to see some focus there. I touched on the enhanced approaches to corporate governance and so on. And that's becoming a bit of an imperative that's driving adoption of BCN. And as I said, increasingly you're beginning to see companies that are looking to see some acknowledgement of business continuity within their supply chain requirements. It may be the box that you tick, and it's sort of optional, but it's conceivable that over the next while, just as though some of the major developments in terms of the offshore perhaps won't do business with a company that isn't ISO certified, it's conceivable that they may in time look to see the business continuity designation and management plans in place there as well. Particularly, as I said, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we've got some of those major project activities that are ongoing.
You know, I just want to say that we're, in my industry now, when we try to pre-qualify to supply, one time it was, do you have ISO 9001, which is quality management? Yes. Now we're seeing, do you have ISO 14001, which is environment? Do you have 45001, which is new and just coming out, which is occupational health and safety? And I would think that very soon, within the next little while, you're going to see, do you have 22,301, which is business continuity. I mean, these standards now are all so similar in their structure, and like if you have done a corporate or an organizational knowledge piece for 9001, it's the same piece you can plug into the other four standards. Okay, so as this idea of the standardization becomes more convenient and can overlap in various ways, you know, it's going to be easy for a client or a customer to say, okay, you know, let's add this in. Do you have that as well, right? So there's this great advantage to becoming involved in BCN from that point of view. And from my point of view, you know, if you're going to be involved in it, let's just go that next step and go get the ISO certification.
So these are just some questions that I'd ask you to ponder. Maybe this might be the basis of discussion. You know, what we found is, you know, people have a sense of how to organize, but they don't necessarily have a sense of how the different processes within that organization operate, or what the relationship with those processes are. A good example that I'd cite would be the work I did in the town of Hollywood. Ultimately, in the town of Hollywood, what people wanted most was when they turned on the tap, they wanted water to come out. And when they flushed the toilet, they didn't want it to back up. It's pretty straightforward. Most people would want that, and that's where the town of Boulder would put a lot of its emphasis in terms of building up capacity around its resumption. But we quickly realized that without decent access to data and information, like where's the pipe in the ground, decent engineering that would allow them to track down the source of the problem, right down to the capacity of the front end staff to deal with residents who may be calling. They began to figure that the relationship between these business units or processes becomes pretty important. And most businesses and organizations don't necessarily understand that if this goes down as well. And you need to think about it in that context. And I guess the next logical one is, what aspects of the business provide the most value? And the value is often difficult to define. Obviously, the example we used a little earlier about the sale of petroleum products to the local oil supplier is important. There's a value there. But how do you place a value on the loss of reputational capital because your customers can't get in contact with you for 48 hours because your call center or your front desk has gone down because of problem calls? How do you recover from that? Hard to assign a cash value to it. You know that if people sort of say, well, I'm not going to order oil from you, I'll go with those folks. You realize the cash value there, but how do you assign a monetary value or a value of reputational capital lost because you are unresponsive as an organization?
I think that from the reputational point of view, your customers or people who are in ISO standards now, it's called your organizational context. Who out there expects something of you, okay? And what are those expectations? So if you don't have a business continuity plan, management plan, and something goes horribly wrong, everybody's going to say, well, why didn't you, if you have one, even if it doesn't work, okay, you have it. And you can say to your customers, look, we have a plan, we're trying to work the plan as best we can, and now we're going to deal with you at this level that we're working towards satisfying you as a customer, okay? So the difference between having one and not having one is very important in terms of your reputation and in terms of your ability to deal with your customers on a one-to-one basis without alienating them, I mean, if I go to the company and say, do you have a business continuity plan? They say no. Like right away, I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to find someone else who can provide these services or provide me these goods, Now, in some cases, you have a specific product with contracts to deliver. I understand that, right? And I'm going to have to come back to you whether I like your business continuity plan or not, or whether you have one or not. If I want that building, I'm going to have to get it from you, right? So that's sort of unique.
I've written a few policies in the
Yeah.
for a pre-qual package, right?
But in a lot of cases, being seen to have one is as important is more important than caught without one. Okay?
I don't disagree with you, like, I've written numerous policies, safety, quality, business continuity, just because you're filling in a pre-qual package and there's,
Yes.
what, do you have a code of ethics?
Yes,
Well,
that's
you
right.
finished that last night, 4 o'clock, yeah, we got one now.
Yeah.
But from a practice perspective, it's useless if you
Yes,
don't roll it out. It's like, to say, well, we're gonna buy from an ISO company. Well, the first 3 years we were ISO, our quality went to hell in a handbasket and sold at our costs,
Yeah.
right? Because everybody thought, now we got an ISO certification, it must mean something. It means something from the outside, but from the inside, if you don't document, follow your practices and revise and
Well, that's
improve
what
on
in
continual
tax
basis.
things here, the word is called embedding. Okay, that's where you get all of your management, all of your employees to understand that you're only going to go forward if they all participate in some way.
It's no different than your safety,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
And it's like just a caution for if you haven't been down the road and you're going there, gotta put some real expectations around,
That's right.
we're gonna start this
Yeah.
today, and we may finish the plan in a year.
Yeah.
And it's gonna take another 3 years before it's part of the core of the
Comes out
company.
of your culture.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
that's, and again, that's another term in BCI, in BC practice that we use, is the corporate culture. It-
You don't
it
have
has-
to pitch it
It has
tomorrow.
become part of, no, it has become part of your corporate culture.
But we, in the association side, we have the same problem. Strategic plan is essentially business plan, you know. And my experience is a lot of groups, you know, they spend so much time and energy developing a strategic plan, but then they fail to, like you said, embed it or put
Yeah.
processes in place to actually go forward and be accountable on it. That's the big thing, right? And so, because everybody gets so busy doing the day-to-day stuff that you forget about the bigger picture
Well,
and what it's supposed to lead to, you know, and often fails, you know, and then people get turned off from the whole process. you
The
know.
best example of failure is that you go through the process, you got a big binder that sits on everyone's desk or in certain locations in the thing, and when something happens, nothing works because no one's really understood it, they haven't
Yeah.
practiced it, they haven't been familiarized with it. So if you build one, then, and that lady said about communications, you know, it behooves you to make sure that everyone in your organization is part of the system and understands what their roles are and so on.
There's no point in pulling it down off the shelf and dusting it off.
No, that
No,
doesn't
after
work.
the fact, it has, everybody has to instinctively.
If that's the kind of business continuity plan you have,
It won't work.
you know, you don't have one, okay? You fail before you even get started, right? If that's your attitude, or if that's the corporate attitude, is that
Would the
we'll do it
auditor-
because we have to have it, but, well, if you're audited, if you follow an ISO standard, then you're audited to that standard.
Right.
So then it has to be working, it has to be live, it has to be embedded, it has to be thought into.
But the auditor that does our ISO 9001, 2008.
Ray knows that.
Right. I mean, our org chart now, in 7 years, is up for revision 37 or 38,
Yeah.
right? Like most, every document that we created back in 2010 has been ripped up 25 times,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
What that indicates is that you can't be sitting on the shelf if you're reviewing it. And it's not process changes, you gotta revise your documentation and your process flows. So we usually score well because we're always revising it. That means we can get it right first time.
We, what I've done.
Yeah, it is continuing.
What I've done with the company I work with is that I set off in 2006 and I said, we are going to become a paperless company. So now what I've done, we have a loss control management system. And the loss control management system incorporates quality, safety, environment, hopefully now soon, if I get the boss to come around, have a business continuity component. And everything is online, so we don't have a binder that says this document is issued on a certain date, is RIV such and such, and here's where we changed and stuff like that. Our document is a living document, digital, on the computer. It's the controlled document. If I print this out for you, if I print it out and I pass it to you, as your customer, for instance, and I pass you this document, that document is no longer controlled, okay? And if you have any question on it, then we go right back to the digital version. So I've saved all that time and effort of binders, changing the name and the date on a piece of paper and all that, you know? And that way, I find, it doesn't just sit on a shelf, okay? If there's a question about quality or safety management in our company now, the first thing we do is say, okay, take the man, you're going to sit down at the computer and you haul up the documentation. Okay? So, you know, Ray has been blown away by the system that I've developed for simply that point of fact. And in fact, I think now Ray, when he comes and does your audit, he'll probably say to you, have you talked about business continuity? Right? Because
Yeah, he's got something working on the
I've
inside.
done that to Ray, right?
Yeah.
But it goes to, I guess, that sort of understanding that, I talked a little earlier about when you're in the business impact assessment and going through the analysis stage, why it becomes important at that point to deal with the right level of people in the organization. Foster that sense of engagement so that the process becomes as much the manager of that production line as it is senior management. Craft that process into the methodology that you use around the analysis and so on, focus groups, whatever the case might be, but it sort of helps.
Is BCM really just another name for sustainability for an organization, or do you see it as in a different
No,
way?
I'd like to answer that because Leslie is the resilience
Yes.
coordinator. I know that your title is coordinator
It is, I
Yeah.
actually have a question.
for the Board of Trade,
Yeah.
which means all your customers, all your members as well,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
And so from what we've seen of Leslie's resilient postings in the magazine and stuff like that, it's some slight variance from what we talk about, okay? So is business continuity management resilience? No, it can build resilience. It's a tool that you use to become resilient, okay? It's not a matter of, it's not a be-all and end-all either, okay? It needs being scalable from a one-man organization to a 10,000 or 50,000 person organization. It's the same principles, the same rules, and the same way of analysis and developing looking at your functions and stuff, right? It has no bearing on the size, okay? And, you know, I wouldn't want to get a business continuity management plan in place for you and have you call it something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're just touching on the point I was going to bring up. You talk a lot about business disruption and business resilience from the point of view, the way that I take it, it's not all about natural disaster.
No.
But it's about things that happen and they happen quickly and how do you respond the next
Inside the
day.
organization.
Right. Here at the Board of Trade, we talk a bit more in terms of innovation, so disruption, and not just technology, but changes to your business model and whatnot that can disrupt the way that you do business in general. I know, the Airbnb concept or Uber has probably been overused, but it's an entire change, a disruption to the entire business model, hospitality and transportation. Do you guys touch on that at all in a business continuity perspective?
Well, what we would do is that if you were our customer, okay, we'd help you determine your view of it. I'm not going to say that this is wrong, that's right. I'm going to say, what do you want to do? How do you want to approach it? What are your most important business functions, and how do you want to protect them or try to protect them?
Right.
So again, it's not something like I say. We're not going to come in and say, do this or else, which is somewhat like ISO certification requires. You follow the standard or else, right? But we help you develop your system. I can't make a system for you, but I can help you build a good, robust system.
I like this term, I see it as more encompassing than just say sustainability. Because sustainability is fairly narrow for a lot of people.
Yes.
For a lot of people, it just means total sales volume.
Yes.
Are we producing enough year over year, or for somebody else, they talk about success, and we retain corporate knowledge, if somebody left, can we replace it, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, to me, this seems to be more comprehensive in the sense of the total organization and what you want to look at, as opposed to just say a narrower
That's right.
piece. That's,
Yeah.
And I think
what I've seen but so far.
to Leslie's point, I don't think that we would, a company's response to share economy would be best met through a market consultant, potentially, or a business consultant. But if I could put it, the best example I would probably use, I think that the Board of Trade has been involved with, would be the Big Dig. And that's the one I sort of go back to. The notion of tearing up the East End Water Street and the impact on businesses during that development. Does business continuity planning provide an opportunity for some of those businesses down there? I would say yes. I would say yes, particularly when you get a little bit of lead time and you have some sense that, foot traffic and vehicular traffic is going to be disrupted. But it wouldn't, that's a market issue because the market can't necessarily walk by your door, but you see there's sort of a line that.
On that point though,
Starts.
a lot of people complain about the big dig and stuff, and I've been downtown for years, so here's where your continuity plan will come in. If they don't fix that, and it collapses one day, and we're suddenly all out of business, that's a problem.
When we do a business, DIA, analysis of business, you know, the obvious question is right off the top are, do you have a marketing plan? Do you have a communications plan? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Do you know, and any of those things will become part of your organization and part of the DCN.
Any other thoughts, questions? We're running out of time.
Another example of an incident, is the flooding or the damage in Churchill Square. And there's quite a number of businesses and practices that were displaced as a result of that. I know of one dental office. You imagine now trying to get access to all of your appointments on a computer system.
No, that's right. Yeah.
That's now got no power to it because they shut the power off. So we need to let those people know they don't have anywhere to go, and you know that they'll be in touch with when they're up again. It's you know, you're dealing with an awful lot of very, very small businesses, and we run into this all the time. You know, you get a 6-person office, and you know, they're dealing with a very small but very critical amount of data for them. And trying to explain to them that they need something in place for continuity, not just IT, but anything else at all, is an uphill battle, because they look at it, well, it's just us. But, you know, just us can be suddenly 6 people that are out of work, or
600 customers
Yeah.
without service.
yeah, exactly, and it is an uphill battle. In regards to benefits, I know that what we try and do when we're looking at this sort of thing from an IT perspective is explain that we don't actually have to just buy duplicates of everything and sit it on a shelf. We can make use of that so that you maybe now have a testing environment, or maybe you have extra capacity to do
Yeah,
things
exactly,
and so on. So
Yeah.
it's not always just an upfront cost that you then just watch depreciate over the next few years until you have to buy it all over again.
It's an investment.
It's an investment, but it helps when you find not just an investment in continuity, but also you can now do this and this and this with the extra gear or whatever.
One of the things we found when we went through our equipment was, like a part that only cost you $50 US. If that went down,
Oh, yeah, that's
our
right.
cutting table went down. We can only get parts from the supplier in New York. So it cost us $1,500, that's a $50 part there. When you look back over it, like, you know, you could expect, depending on your production volumes, that to go 3 or 4 times a year. Keep boarding stock,
Yeah.
when you use one, replace it.
Bring it on.
So we pay $50 and you should get for 10.
Which is why, as I said earlier, it becomes so important to get down to the level of the person in that business process
Yeah.
that understands
The
that.
maintenance guy.
Head office doesn't necessarily understand that piece of equipment, which they're changing out
It was
every
about a whole year's work for him to go through every piece of equipment, go back through all the data and say, you know, this piece only goes down once every 3 years, or we do a service every 3 years. It never goes down, right?
Well, here's a prime example in terms of cost and where our role ends and the buy-in of management and the organization begins. The level of detail, I mean, you could pay us to go in and do that sort of stuff, right? Which is great. But this is where the engagement of management and staff, there's only a commitment of staff resources to figure out what that inventory ultimately is in terms of parts or whatever it is. And then matching that with an understanding, well, that part goes out once every 6 months and that one goes out every quarter. That's, I guess my
When
point
you
there
capture
is,
dollar value, you gotta think about shipping costs, you got air freight or production downtime if you can't continue to produce. And, you know, to go back to the ISO thing, just having to write your procedures and your policies. I mean, we're a small company, there's only 50 of us, we got one maintenance guy. And in June of last year, I mean, he was phenomenal. And he left, right, work for Eastern Health. I was like, oh my God. But, you know, we found a young guy to come in with, you know, not quite as much experience, but he picked up the manuals, he picked up the plans that had been written. And within 4 to 6 weeks, he was pretty well up to speed. You know, there were some detailed things, we had to get the equipment suppliers to come in and go through it with them, because it's equipment nobody ever saw before, right? But generally speaking, so I take that now, you know, I want to go through this process. I'll go back and pick up a half a dozen examples. Because we do this,
Yeah, this is.
it
what
allowed
happened.
this to continue or
Yeah.
save the money, right?
I could say, in the final note perhaps, is that don't think of business continuity management or business continuity management plan or any of that stuff. Don't think of it as something alien or different or new to you.
You're already
Okay?
doing it.
You're already doing a lot of it. It's just a matter of formalizing it and understanding what roles people play and how the system's going to work, right? That's, you know, you're not spending a big bunch of money to create something out of nothing. You already have a lot of the stuff in place. It's just a matter of coordinating it and looking at it again in a holistic fashion.
So this kind of thing is really important, I think, to a lot of small family-owned businesses. It's crazy, especially the succession planning. I read an article last year that said that 80%, something like 80% of family-owned enterprises didn't have any type of succession plan.
Yeah.
So if the founder died suddenly, which a lot of people do at some point, or, you know, and then the business collapsed because they didn't have the plan to hand it off successfully, you know, or
One of the World Trade examples that I read once was that there were a number of people with kiosks, like newspapers and coffee and sandwiches and stuff like that in all those buildings, right? And I think about half of them actually had a business continuity plan in place. The other half didn't. And the half that did all survived and managed to open up a kiosk again in a new place or in a building, right? The ones that didn't have simply slipped away. They weren't killed, but their business was killed, right?
yeah.
So, you know, it really is, in many ways, I think business continuity planning is insurance. You know, so if you're talking about cost of it, look at the cost that you would pay out for insurance, let's say premiums. And if you have a BC plan in place, there's a good chance you can save some money on your insurance premiums if you get the right agent and you're powerful enough to talk to them. So the cost thing shouldn't be a consideration in terms of what you want to do and where you want to go with it, right?
And if you gotta convince people, you know, find the numbers, I'll go back to, you know, just the safety program. So 9 years ago, with the workplace health and safety, there's a crime program that you get 25, up to
Yes.
25%. Well, in 2012, which is 7 years ago, we were paying in 25% more than our premiums.
Yeah.
So in addition to your premium, we were paying it in, and we were losing another 5% because we didn't have a standardized safety program. So over 7 years, we've built a program, and now we're getting back our 5%. We're getting back about 24.5% of the 25%. Our rates are down. But like it was a 6 or 7 year deal, right?
We went through the same sort of-
And I think, and that's the part, because I was so disappointed with me in the first 2 or 3 years. It's like, you know, we're doing all this work, but the numbers are not giving me the evidence, right? But now, looking back over, you know, 4 years, 5 years, you can see, you know, the arrow's going up the way you want it to go, or it's going down the way you want it to go, right? So, you know, but I think part of it is being realistic. When we went into ISO, I mean, we had consultants on contract for like 6 months, or, you know, a period every month. We didn't understand their expectations internally, right? Because, I mean, they give you a list of work to do, they come back next month, it's like, oh, we'll do it the night before we come. Right?
But you know now.
Oh, I know now. I know when the bills came in.
Well, folks, thanks for your attention. You know, I sort of, we approached this, we wanted to commemorate, or at least to put an event on during Business Continuity Awareness Week. So thanks to the Board of Trade for lining up that opportunity for us. So, you know, sometimes I approach this stuff with a bit of skepticism and thinking that some people do anything for free coffee and a croissant. But to be honest, I think we've had a pretty decent discussion today. I'm going to thank you all for coming out. Hopefully you're leaving with a better understanding and appreciation of where business continuity might fit within your organization. If you need to call on us at any time, don't hesitate to
Well,
do so.
my hope is that now we have 9 more people who are conversant with business continuity management and planning, and you know, it would grow. So next time you're at an industry association meeting, trot it out, talk about it, see how people will react to it.